Hi, it's Maya here with my June reads and receipts, and my TBR count at the start of the month was 72 books. And let's start with the reads. In June I read 17 books and comics, so I have quite a lot to talk about. At one point I was planning to do 30 books in 30 days, but that didn't quite end up happening, but I still have 17 things to talk about. Thankfully I don't have as much to say about some of them as others, so some of them I can go through quite quickly. But let's start with The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie. I finished this on the 1st of June, so I read most of this in May, and this is an owned physical book, so it brings my TBR down to 71 books. And this is a fantasy book that is narrated by a god. There is also a human main character called Eolo. The god narrates his actions through a you pronoun. He is watching Eolo and narrating his actions. So everything is from the god's perspective. It's about a political power struggle when a ruler disappears and his brother takes his place before the planned heir, the ruler's son, can get back and arrive back to the city. And the human main character is that heir's aide. The you narration through the eyes of the god can be a bad thing for some people. It does keep the reader at a distance from all the human characters, but I didn't mind because I loved the god, the narrator god, so much. I especially loved the god talking through its history. Those were my favorite parts of the book. The human main character in this is a trans man. It is discussed a couple of times in the book, and I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed the god and living through its history. Then I finished Akiko Higashimura's Tokyo Tarareba Girls contemporary manga series by reading volumes 8 and the final volume 9. And this tells about 30-something women who are thinking in what ifs and really trying to find husbands and get married. It was not as good as Princess Jellyfish, another of her series that I really loved, but I liked where this went in the end, and it always did make me laugh. There were too many Tokyo Tarareba bonus comics, especially in the last 2 volumes. There was actually so little of the actual manga in the last 2 volumes that they could have been easily combined into 1 volume. Like this last volume, it had only 2 chapters of the actual manga. I would give this series as a whole about 3.5 stars. It does make me laugh. A lot of the earlier volumes were 3 stars, a lot of the latter ones were 3.5 stars. I enjoyed some of the character moments. So those were both owned digital comics. And then I read an owned ebook, and that was The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. This is a short horror novella, about 50 pages. It focuses on a young man, Simpson, out on a hunting trip in Canada with a group of people, including his uncle. Simpson and his guide end up going to this place that are the hunting grounds for this spooky creature. I didn't like this as much as the Willows, from which I've read from him before. Willows was much stronger. Both of these are set in the wilderness, and Blackwood is great at crafting a sentence and building an atmosphere. Nature really seems alive in these stories, but this book also had a lot of added baggage from being a book from 1910 that is built on native folklore and also features a native background character, with some jarring racial depictions and offhand comments with racial slurs. The story wasn't as good as The Willows. I did give this one 3 stars because I really like the elaborate writing style and the description of nature. Then I read a library book, and that is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine, and I had decided that June was a free library month for me, free from this project. I could borrow as many library books as I want, and I borrowed this before my library day vlog, which I will link. But anyway, this one is a young adult science fiction classic about Meg, who goes to save her father together with her little brother and this boy from her school, and they are aided by these 3 powerful beings who appear as older women. I was very pleasantly surprised by this book because I had seen the movie first, and this was a lot better than the movie, at least in my opinion, having seen the movie first. This remained a much more cohesive whole. It followed a clear path. It had a lot less of these flailing actiony sequences that were added to the movie for some reason. This is quite an enjoyable adventure story that I really liked reading when I was reading it, and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Bone Rose by Jeff Smith and Charles Vess, and this is like a prequel to the middle grade comic called Bone. So this one doesn't have art by Jeff Smith. This has art by Charles Vess. I really do like Charles Vess. He does great dragons. This is some backstory to some of the characters who are older in Bone. So this is when they were young people, and I liked it fine. I don't really have much to say about it. I gave it 3 stars. Then I read the first volume of Hawkeye. This is the Kate Bishop Hawkeye, Volume 1, Anchor Points by Kelly Thompson, and I always forget the artist's name, Leonardo Romero and Michael Walsh. This is a library comic. I like the Kate Bishop character. I liked her in Young Avengers. She was in the Hawkeye comics with Clint Barton Hawkeye by Matt Fraction, and I really enjoyed her in those. And this was fun, but I'm not really big into the superhero starts a detective agency. I think it's quite common nowadays to start a series with a superhero who hasn't been a detective before starting a detective agency. But otherwise, I quite enjoyed this. As I said, I like Kate. I gave this 3 stars. It isn't quite that memorable, but it was fun. Then from the library I also read Atlas Alone by Emma Newman, a science fiction novel in her Planetfall universe, and I really love Emma Newman's writing style. It's so easy to read and has a nice pace to it, even when she deals with difficult topics like mental illness. The mystery in this one was also great. This takes place like quite soon after Atlas, with a lot of the same characters, so you need to have read that one before this. So like I said, the mystery in this one was really great. Even though I guessed the identity of the hacker about halfway through the book, that didn't take away my enjoyment, and the plot still had some surprises in store for me, and I really enjoyed reading this. But my rating went down a bit because of 2 things. One is that I don't really know yet how I feel about the very, very end. And the second, that I'm not sure about the decision to have this particular protagonist be asexual. Because Dee talks a lot about her lack of sexual interest. She never uses the term, but Emma Newman has used the term in interviews. But because of her past trauma, Dee has a lot of like mental and emotional blocks and issues, not having to do with her asexuality, but which fall under the misconceptions and stereotypes about asexual people. So that might reinforce those without meaning to. Stereotypes like being closed, cold, or unemotional. But I did really like Dee because of her hang-ups and because she was such an interesting character. I hope there will be more books set in this world. After Atlas does remain my favorite, but this one I gave 3.5 stars. It was going to be 4 stars, but then I couldn't quite decide on 4 stars. Then from the library I read The House with a Clock in Its Walls by John Bellairs. I happen to read 2 like young adult middle grade books that have had recent movie adaptations. In this one I haven't seen the movie. And this is about this young boy who moves in with his uncle, who is a wizard, and there's a mystery about the house, stuff happens. But it was a pastime that overall didn't leave a big impression on me. It didn't really get me invested in its plot, but it was a short and quick read, so I finished it. I don't think the story really reached its potential. The spooky atmosphere, the evil magician backstory, or the ominous clock. I did like Mrs. Zimmerman as a character. It's really nice to see like functioning adult characters in children's books who aren't related, who aren't family or closely related to the kids. She's just a next door neighbor who is friends with his uncle. And I also really enjoyed the black and white illustrations in this. This edition has illustrations by Nathan Collins, and I think they fit perfectly in the story. And they were actually a nice combination of gothic and cute. I really enjoyed them. I gave this book 2 stars. Then I buddy read another short story collection with Rachel. This is an owned physical book, Word Puppets by Mary Robinette Kowal. This one was a 3-star short story collection for me. I give a lot of short story collections 3 stars. They have to be quite strong to get more, because there are always like a couple of stories that I really enjoy and some that I don't. In this one my favorites were Rampion, which was a Rapunzel retelling, Body Language, which was about puppetry, it's a science fiction thing, First Flight, which was about time travel, and Salt of the Earth, which was a really harrowing science fiction story. Short story collections are not really like my main thing, like a thing that I easily can love, but I gave this one 3 stars, some good stories. This brings my TBR down to 70 books. Then from the library I read a science fiction comic on a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden. I read the edition with this cover, the US edition, but I actually vastly prefer the UK edition. It's just a really pretty cover. So this is a story about a young girl who joins this spaceship where this group of people goes around restoring historical landmarks, historical cities in space. They move from planet to planet, from place to place. And it tells the story of her being in this crew and her background story being in like a boarding school with a girl she falls in love with. There are a lot of romantic relationships between women, and there's a non-binary character. When I got the book from the library, I remember I read the blurb from the back in one video where it said something about 2 timelines, and I was excited that there were 2 timelines, but there actually weren't. It was just that one was the current story and one was the backstory. I'm sad to say it wasn't really for me. Like, I didn't get a lot from it, and the text was, in the US edition at least, was way too small. It was the text straight from the webcomic edition. You can also read this online for free. It was too small in print form. It should have been re-lettered. Also, I felt that the colors were a lot more washed out, which changed the mood quite a bit. I don't know if it was a choice or if it was just printed straight from the webcomic originals and they didn't really color correct it for print, or it might have just been the paper, because the paper was actually really sucking the colors in. But I gave this one 2.5 stars. Check it out if you are interested in a quiet science fiction story, a boarding school romance, a ragtag group fixing stuff in space. Check it out. Then the rest of the books, I don't really have that much to say about them, so I'm just gonna go through them quickly. I have In the Hand of the Goddess by Tamora Pierce. This is the second book in the Song of the Lioness series. This is young adult fantasy series. It's about Alana who dresses up as a boy in order to become a knight. These are so lovely. These are so fun to read. I never read this as a kid. They weren't translated to Finnish. I just want to keep going. I just want to get the rest of the series out from the library and read them right now. I read this over midsummer when I was visiting some family in the countryside. I just was laying on the grass reading this, and it was so much fun. I gave this one 4 stars. I've already filmed so many videos today that I'm losing my voice. But let's continue. This is Blameless by Gail Carriger. I read the audiobook. This was a reread for me. This is the 3rd book in the Parasol Protectorate series. In this one, Alexia goes around Europe, goes to visit France and Italy. This one isn't my favorite from the series, and there's some things about the end that I don't like. I'm still quite mad at one character, but I gave this one 3 stars. These are always fun to read. Then I read Lady Susan. This is a bind-up of Persuasion and Lady Susan. Lady Susan is actually a really short story. It was about 60 pages in this edition. It's like an really early work of Jane Austen's. It's told in letters, and the main character is Lady Susan, and she's a really fun, scheming character. It was quite fun to read. I gave it 3 stars. And reading Lady Susan brings my TBR down to 69 books, so we are under 70. Then from the library I read J.Y. Yang's The Black Tides of Heaven. This is the first one in the series of novellas. It's a fantasy inspired by East Asian inspired fantasy. So the main characters are twins, Mokoya and Akeha is the main character of this one, and Mokoya is the main character of the second novella, and they are the children of this ruler of this country, but they are raised in a monastery. I think I will enjoy the one about Mokoya maybe more. I like this, I like the world, but maybe I didn't connect with Akeha as a character that much, but I'm interested to continue on with the series. I gave this first one 3 stars. Then I read Delicious in Dungeon Volume 4 by Ryoko Kui. This is a story about a group of adventurers who go in a dungeon trying to rescue one of their members who has been eaten by a dragon. They can still rescue her, but they have run out of food, they have run out of money. They are killing the monsters and then cooking and eating them. Some of them are more into this than others. It's a lot of fun. It has monster recipes. Check the series out if you want some fantasy comedy. I gave this one 4 stars. And the final thing that I read in June was My Brother's Husband, Volume 1 by Gengoro Tagame, and this is from the library. So the main character is Yaichi. He's a father. He lives in Japan. He had a twin brother, but his brother moved to Canada, and his brother has just died there. His brother, when he moved to Canada, he married a Canadian man there, and now Yaichi's brother's husband has come to visit them in Japan. And Yaichi really has to confront his homophobia and many of his preconceived notions about gay people. He hasn't really confronted the fact that his brother was gay, even though his brother did tell him. I think this manga goes through a lot of necessary things for Japan. Like it says in the description, a look at the stage of a largely still closeted Japanese gay culture. I did enjoy the art of this. The line art is very clean, very clear, and the little girl, Kana, is super cute. I gave this one 3 stars. So that was all that I read in June from my 5 books in June TBR. I didn't get to The Signet and the Firebird or Experimental Film because I wasn't in the right mood to read them. I just didn't want to start them, but I am currently reading them. It's Editing Maya here, letting you know that since this video was getting so long, I decided to split it into 2 parts, so those are my June reads and the receipts are coming up next.